2 decades have passed since the world entered a new millennium. The world has undergone countless upheavals, including a historic pandemic. However, one constant remains. The leader of Russia is still Vladimir Putin. As a superpower throughout history to the present, Russia has always played a pivotal role in shaping global dynamics. Although it has become a republic with a history deeply influenced by monarchy and socialism, Russians seem to still feel more aligned with having a strong leader. In the course of history, this great nation have called upon Putin to be at the helm for nearly 3 decades. Across the Pacific, the United States has seen 5 presidents come and go. As the world's leading superpower and the dominant force in global media, the image of Russia, particularly Putin, is often painted as the antagonist. However, it is crucial to remember that this portrayal is from a narrative where the Americans are the protagonists. To provide the most neutral perspective possible, we need to revisit the journey of this former KGB agent as he faced 5 different U.S. presidents. Without further ado, let's explore this long but remarkable journey with the World Explainer. Before stepping into the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin was a KGB intelligence officer stationed at the epicenter of Cold War tensions in Berlin. When the colossal Soviet Union collapsed along with the Eastern Bloc, Putin was not with his people. We won't delve into whether the US government had a hand in this collapse, but it is vital to understand that Putin, like many Russians of his time, shared a common sentiment. That was the feeling of humiliation and disgrace in the face of America's resilience. From an objective standpoint, the Soviet Union's fall was more than a defeat in a conflict. It was the collapse of a global ideology, a defeat that left a once proud nation emerging heroically from World War II to watch its country disintegrate and witness the West gloating. From this moment, Putin vowed to himself that he would help Russia reclaim its former glory, to regain its rightful status as a leading nation, rather than waving a white flag to the growing might of capitalist countries, represented by the US. Democracy or freedom of speech? Putin has never been interested in these Western values. His sole focus upon entering the Kremlin was to restore the grandeur and rightful place of a great nation that Russia deserves. Clinton, Putin, disagreement over Kosovo, nuclear issues, and NATO. Vladimir Putin officially became president of Russia on December 31, 1999. While the relationship between former Russian President Boris Yeltsin and US President Clinton was considered warm, everything was completely different with Putin. Immediately after Putin took office on January 2, 2000, US Secretary of State Madeleine Albright assessed the new Russian president as a tough, determined man who was more inclined towards action than rhetoric. She stated that America would have to pay close attention to his actions. Indeed, Albright's prediction held true for over a decade. Just 6 days after Putin took office, US President Bill Clinton visited Russia. The first meeting on January 6, 2000, was an opportunity for the two leaders to discuss disagreements related to Washington's installation of a US missile shield in Europe to bolster international security against the threat of rogue states like Iraq and Iran developing nuclear weapons. Contrary to the expectation of cooperation from the new Russian president, Putin immediately displayed a very tough stance by opposing Clinton's delegation's desires. Born in 1952, Putin argued that the US missile system in Europe would reduce Russia's nuclear deterrent capabilities. Clearly, Putin did not value relations with the US over Russia's military interests. This disagreement remains relevant today. Putin understood that if he conceded to American demands, it would not be long before missile points across Europe would be aimed at Moscow. Just a year before Putin took office, the US and NATO had shattered Yugoslavia. The fragmentation of this ethnically complex Balkan nation could potentially create a foothold closer to Russia. NATO, led by the US, did not hide its intention to target Yugoslavia. NATO always sought to intervene in Yugoslavia's internal affairs under the pretext of resolving long-standing ethnic and religious conflicts. By blatantly attacking the territory of a sovereign nation like Yugoslavia, The US and NATO sent a message that they had the right to impose their views, not through political initiatives, but through military strength, even without the United Nations Security Council's consent. Therefore, at the very beginning of his first term, Putin made a strong move in Chechnya. Unlike his predecessor, who allowed the military to get bogged down, the new president sent an overwhelming force to the area. A powerful campaign lasting only a few months enabled Russia to retake Chechnya in May 2000. This was a significant blow to the US and Europe's plans to destabilize Chechnya, to cut off Russia's access to the Middle East through the Chechnya Gateway. Bush and Putin, friendship and disagreement. Regarding the relationship between George W. Bush and Vladimir Putin, many may remember that the two presidents had a very good personal relationship, even considering each other as friends. In their first meeting on June 16, 2001, George W. Bush said he saw the soul of a man deeply dedicated to his country. The US president viewed his Russian counterpart as a noteworthy and trustworthy leader. Putin was also the first foreign head of state to be hosted at the Bush family's summer retreat. President Bush personally went to the airport to greet the Russian president and bring him back to the family estate. The Russian president appreciated the honesty, openness, and listening attitude of his American counterpart. Bush at that time was criticized by his opponents for being too pro-Russia. However, the warm personal relationship and mutual respect could not mask the reality that US-Russia relations during the Bush and Putin era deteriorated significantly, often considered the worst since the Cold War due to many disagreements. Notably, Bush's unilateral decision to withdraw the USS from the 1972 ABM Treaty to establish a ballistic missile defense shield in Europe, which Putin strongly opposed. In 2003, Putin's administration accused the US of invading Iraq. As the war in Iraq became a quagmire for the US, Putin stated he would not be lectured on democracy by the US president. During a joint press conference with President Bush, Putin said, "We do not want a democracy like in Iraq." This was a clear assertion of his and Russia's inviolable position. Later, the Bush administration was also accused by Moscow of influencing and covertly supporting the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. Additionally, Kosovo's independence was another deeply divisive issue between the two most powerful men in the world. Obama and Putin, unsuccessful reset. Even though Obama, a Democrat, contrasted with Republican Bush, the first black president of the US began his diplomacy with Russia with a goal of a reset. Unfortunately, Obama misjudged Putin and placed his bet on Medvedev, who was president at the time. From the start, the relationship between Obama and Putin was not promising. On his first visit to Moscow, Obama was invited to breakfast by Russian Prime Minister Putin, but the US president made a mistake by ignoring Putin and focusing on interactions primarily with Medvedev. To Obama, Putin was just a prime minister, and he only wanted to deal directly with his counterpart. The world welcomed the new decade with a massive event called the Arab Spring. For President Obama, the Arab Spring was as significant to the US as the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. Therefore, after the US and NATO removed President Gaddafi in October 2011, Senator John McCain declared that the Libya scenario would repeat in Syria, Iran, post-Soviet states, and Russia. The Obama administration was entirely mistaken in believing that the Arab Spring could overthrow the regimes of Middle Eastern countries and establish democracy. After returning to the Kremlin in 2012, President Putin decided to help Syria, Russia's ally in the Middle East, counter the threat posed by the Arab Spring to Russia. Thus, the war in Syria effectively became a confrontation between the two superpowers. In August 2013, Russia granted political asylum to Edward Snowden, a former US security consultant who exposed the large-scale eavesdropping system of American intelligence. A few days later, President Obama canceled a summit with Putin, regretting that Russia had revived the Cold War atmosphere. The cancellation of a summit at the presidential level had never occurred in US-Russia relations since the Cold War. Everything hit rock bottom when the war in eastern Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea occurred. Not only was Obama unable to prevent this action by Russia, but he also failed to overthrow Bashar al-Assad in Syria, demonstrating his complete weakness and failure before Putin. Putin and Trump's unpredictable character. Although Trump did not receive a Nobel Peace Prize like Obama, it was actually Trump who helped the U.S. avoid further wars. Most notably, he restored warmth in diplomatic relations with Russia and Putin. As a tycoon with an independent and extremely brash personality, Trump became a thorn in the side of the political establishment. The humorous billionaire frequently praised the qualities and strength of his Russian counterpart. Even during his re-election campaign in September 2020, Trump asserted, "I like Putin. He likes me. We get along well." Clearly, Trump could show toughness if he wanted to. Under President Donald Trump, the U.S. implemented numerous policies on trade and security to counter China's rise. In reality, U.S.-Russia relations under Donald Trump were more strained than under his predecessor, Obama. The deterioration of bilateral relations was not directly caused by Trump, but was mainly related to the U.S. Congress and the State Department. Trump's pro-Putin attitude and unpredictable nature made the U.S. Congress wary, leading to the passage of a law limiting the president's power to lift sanctions against Russia. Biden and Putin returned to hostility. It's uncertain how fate decided, but the U.S. elected Obama's former vice president, Joe Biden, as its 46th president. President Joe Biden continued to maintain a tough stance against President Putin, similar to Obama. Immediately after stepping into the White House, Biden warned that when the days of the U.S. turning a blind eye to Russia's actions were over. This statement came despite Putin sending a congratulatory letter to Biden upon his election as U.S. president. However, all of this was merely rhetoric. The Biden administration's weakness was evident in its failure to prevent the war in Ukraine, which somewhat shook America's standing. Meanwhile, despite facing numerous economic sanctions from the West, Russia seemed undeterred in its quest to reclaim its status as a leading superpower. 5 U.S. presidents over more than 2 decades, yet only one leader for vast Russia. We do not judge the right or wrong of Putin's actions on the international stage. However, we must acknowledge one thing: the unwavering trust of the Russian people in their leader. The answer to this is likely the consistency in Putin's leadership. No matter what happens in the world, the man from St. Petersburg always puts the interests of his country first. Perhaps that is the most important quality of a leader, rather than being seen as a dictator through the eyes of outsiders. What do you think of Putin? Let's discuss in the comments below. For now, goodbye and see you next time.